Could you mute everybody?
What?
Sure. All right.
Hello.
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 Whenever you're ready, start speaking up, up and down.
Oh, you want me to start now?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
fine. All right. I'll play your silly game. Sure. Sure, Richard, if that's how you want to be. It's right there. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. A pleasure to see you once again for the fifth and final time as Rabbi Wisnia discusses who are the Jews, because I know. So, first of all, I want to talk today, not first of all, but today I'm going to talk about Israel. There are two definitions of that word. One is the people, and number two is the place. Let us begin with the people. So, since we're already discussing racism, are the Jews a race? No, we're not a race, because I define race as biological. Now, personally, folks, I am a type O blood. All people who are type O blood are my people. They are my race. You can find me a black, white, yellow, purple woman or man who is type O, and we can trade blood and organ. No, well, not that easily, but you get the point. We're the same race. We're the same biology. Now, then again, there's some aliens. I live with one of them. I'm liberal. I married her. She's a type A blood. And let me tell you, she is a type A. A little too tense, a little too nervous, and you know, her whole family, they're all wacko, man. But I married her because I'm liberal and I live with her. Now, the thing that annoys me the most about it is that she gave birth to my children, or she says they're my children, but they have her blood, they have type A blood. So they can't be my people. I paid for college anyway, because I'm just that kind of nice guy, because I'm an O, and we're positive. And I say, oh, isn't that nice? Oh, isn't that wonderful? Oh, you're a type A, you're crazy, but okay. Then my son-in-law is a type B. That's not my people. Now, I will admit he takes good care of my daughter, so I'm very careful not to alienate him. And he does say that he tries to be positive. And I say, that's okay, Matt, but we're not blood, fun. We're not blood. You just married my daughter and I take care of you, but that's it. And then we got them damn AB half-breeds. You can't trust them. First of all, they don't share their blood with anybody. I share my blood with everybody because I'm friendly, I'm old. So there are races in the universe. Skin color is meaningless. You find me an O, they're my kind of people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe any of the crap that I just said, please don't, because it is stupid. Blood type, skin color, hair color, eye color, all this means nothing, nothing at all. Jews are not a race. If you look at the Jews, and I have, our blood types mirror the blood types of every nation we live among. Racially, we look like the biology of every nation we live among. You go down to Africa, you'll find all the Jews living there are black. You go to Poland, you'll find they're all gorgeous have black curly hair, who smile and are nice people. You go somewhere else, they're not as nice, but they look like the population because biologically we have mixed and there is no Jewish race. So that leaves us with the question, what is a Jew? Well, as I have hopefully explained to you, we are, number two, a people. We are a people. Now, I deprecated my poor son-in-law, Matthew, and said he's a B, not good enough to be an A. Matthew's good enough to be anything he wants because I love him. He's a wonderful person. He married into my family and he is my son. We are family. We are a people. We have no biology together, me and Matthew. We're not even blood relations. But yet we are family. And that's what an Am is. It is a people, a family. So number one, we refer to ourselves as the Hebrew word Yehudi, which is the English word Jew. Yehudi means somebody who comes from the land of Yehudah, which is the second number two we're going to talk about, the land of Israel, which is Yehudah. We call ourselves Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, for we are a family. And just like you can marry in and marry out and leave if you want, we are a family. Are we a race? No. Are we a collective Am? Yes, we are. Now, interestingly, in the Bible, you remember I talked about the three parts of the Old Testament, the Torah, the first 5 books, the Nevi'im, the 21 books of prophets, and the 13 books called writings, Ketubim, the book of Ruth, the book of Proverbs, the book of Esther. We don't know who wrote the Ketubim. They're not signed. They're just Jewish wisdom literature from around that time. Let's focus in on the book of Ruth in the Ketubim, because that book deals with the issue of becoming a Jew. How does one become a Jew? Ruth lives in Moab. She is a Moabitess. She is not a Jew. She marries a Jewish guy from Israel, and he moves to Moab, and then he dies. And Ruth's mother-in-law, her husband's mother, says, well, Ruth, your husband's dead. Go back to your people. Go be a Moabitess again. And Ruth says to Naomi, her mother-in-law, no, I like his crazy Jewish stuff. And your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. That is in the Torah, in the Bible, and that is considered by later rabbis to be the operant issue. Your people are my people, and your God, meaning the commandments, the 613 commandments of God, are my obligation. So if you want to know who's a Jew, I think the book of Ruth defines it for you. You're a member of Am Yehudi, the Jewish people, and you believe that the 613 commandments from God are your responsibility. So what are we? Are we a nation? We're a people. We all don't live in the same nation. In fact, it's very strange, and we don't define it because in modern society we don't deal like this. I am an American because I pay taxes to America, but I could leave America, pick up and go somewhere else. And would I still be an American? Well, I'll always be a New York boy, I guess. You can't get rid of that. But I could stop being an American if I would go pay my taxes to England and live there. In the Bible, to become a Jew, what does Ruth do? She says, your people shall be my people and your God my God. And she converts to Judaism. And how does that happen? She takes a Hebrew name and lives with the people. Please turn the page. So, to be Jewish, you have a Hebrew name and you live with the people. The question is, what is our religion? Because religion, remember, is the way we kind of define ourselves, but we also have the idea of ethnicity and peoplehood. Up until the time of the Babylonians in 586 BCE, the Jews pretty much all lived in Israel. But from that year, 586 BCE, the summer actually, 9th of Av, the Babylonians dispersed us. And we stayed dispersed up until Napoleon Bonaparte. So let's jump in history to mon ami, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, Napoleon was a major impact on Jewish identity, which is really funny because Napoleon didn't want to be. First of all, Napoleon himself was a bit of an anti-Semite. But Napoleon was also a very smart cookie, and he realized that it was liberté, égalité et fraternité, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and Napoleon. And as long as you added the and Napoleon, he loved you. The Jews added the and Napoleon. So Napoleon said, so why are we all hating the Jews? Why are we persecuting the Jews? In fact, they're all fighting for me in France. So I think they're okay. And everybody said, oh, come on, Napoleon, they're Jews, really? They killed Jesus. And he said, nah, they didn't kill Jesus. Who cares? That was so long ago. The church don't like them, but I don't like the church, so that don't mean much. And they fight in my army. So therefore, I want to hear no discrimination against Jews. And I don't want to hear discrimination against Protestants. In fact, I want you to stop discriminating people. Anybody who fights for Napoleon is now French, and we love them. This was a major change in the world. The Jews flocked to Napoleon's army. In fact, Napoleon's favorite soldier was a Polish Jew by the name of Baruch Yoselevich. Baruch was a 6'4" giant bear, and he would put Napoleon on his shoulders. And Napoleon would walk, and Yoselevich would walk around the camp, Napoleon sitting on his shoulders. Napoleon, of course, loved it because he would tower over everybody. And he would call Yoselevich his personal horse, which, let me tell you, being Napoleon's personal horse was quite an honor. And Yoselevich was a famous soldier, renowned, and Napoleon loved him. He loved his horse, took good care of him. Napoleon stopped anti-Semitism. People still said, hey, Napoleon, they're Jews. What are you, crazy? So Napoleon invented the game 20 Questions. In February 1807, not many people know that Napoleon Bonaparte sent a letter to the leading Jews of all of Europe. And he said, all you Jews live in these crazy countries. I want to know. He asked 20 questions. Will you be loyal to Napoleon? Do you hate Christians? Do you poison wells? The Jews were only too happy to answer and say, we love Napoleon. We're loyal to whatever country we live in. We don't hate our Christian neighbors. All we want is to be equal and to left alone. So Napoleon ordered, after the February 1807 Sanhedrin that he convened, I want no more anti-Semitism. All ghettos in Europe must be destroyed. Jews can live wherever they want, and Jews, Protestants, and Christians, and Catholics can now be citizens of my empire. The Jews loved him. And what happened was two new kinds of Judaism grew out of Napoleon. Those who wanted to maintain the old order, the old Talmudic ways, started calling themselves Orthodox. Those who were the young Turks who wanted to change and evolve and become citizens and move out of the ghettos into the world started calling themselves Reform. And by 1810, there was already the first Reform congregation in Gießen, Germany. And what did Reform mean? It meant that they spoke the vernacular. It meant they dressed like their co-citizens, and they lived in the modern world. So that by 1900, when Europeans started moving to America, the majority of them were either Orthodox or Reform. Now, Napoleon never conquered Russia, so that in Russia, things never changed. Napoleon's reforms did not take place. But between France, England, and Poland, everybody was either Orthodox or Reform. What happened is in 1881, the Tsar of Russia was assassinated, Alexander II. And Alex's son, ingeniously named Alexander III, on the anniversary of Daddy's death, May 1st, 1882, issued a series of laws saying, there are 3.5, 4 million Jews in Russia, I don't want them here. And he put extremely nasty laws on the Jews, called the May Laws of 1882. 2.5 million Russian Jews picked up and came to New York City. And they went a few miles outside, but that was it. So if you are a New Yorker Jew, your relatives come from Russia, and they came here between 1880 and World War I. These Jews were neither Orthodox nor Reform. They looked at the Orthodox Jews here and said, they're crazy God freaks. They looked at the Reform Jews and they said, they're Germans who don't want to be Jewish. We want to stay ethnically Jewish, but we want to be American. So they became the middle of the road people, conservative. And that all happened around 1900. So since 1900, we have had three kinds of Jews, very similar. The Orthodox, who want to maintain the old European order, all the rituals. The Reform on the other extreme, who say, let's change and live in the modern world. And 100 years later, the conservative in the middle, who said, we want to stay ethnically Jewish. We don't want to be as Orthodox as the Orthodox. We don't want to be as Reform as the Reform. We're in the middle. One new thing did happen in the 1930s. A conservative rabbi, Mordechai Kaplan. Mordechai Kaplan wrote a book which he called Reconstructing Judaism, in which Mordechai said, Jews are an ethnicity. We are a culture. We are a people. And he wanted to create a fourth kind of Judaism, not a religion, but a nationality. Mordechai had a major problem. He failed because he was totally successful. Everybody today is pretty much a Reconstructionist. However, they didn't form a fourth kind of Judaism. They stayed Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. So Mordechai's problem was he was too successful. So today, that's how Jews kind of identify themselves. They kind of look at themselves as either Orthodox where they take all the rituals and all the traditions and say God ordained them and we have to do them. Or they are Reform on the left wing, which says they're all just customs we can change, or the conservative, which is the middle of the road. This is breaking down because everybody today is pretty much a Reconstructionist. We've all accepted the idea we are a people, we are an ethnicity. Let me stop here and ask, are there any questions at the moment about what I have said about the people of Israel? Yes, who's raising their hand?
Lisa,
Lisa.
your cousin.
Hello, Lisa. You got a question? You're just waving at me.
No, I have a question. So, and maybe you covered it and I missed it, but I did one of those DNA tests and it said I'm like 99% Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah.
So to me, that's more than just a people, there's something in my DNA that says I'm Jewish, right? Like, I don't know how they can say that. Like, how does that come about that in my DNA test, they can say you are Jewish?
Well, they're not. What they're saying is that your family, from at least the 1800s, was a bunch of unmarried Jews in Poland. Okay, and that's true. The Jews in Russia were horribly discriminated against, and the Jews responded by totally turning in and not being Russian, so that the Jews lived in the Russian Empire but were not Russians. They were not citizens of the Russian Empire. They spoke Russian, they served the Russian army, they lived under a Russian government, but they thought of themselves as totally separate. That's why when those Jews from Russia came here in 1900, everybody said, oh, you're from Russia, you're Russian. They said, no, we're Jews. So we're now Americans, but we're Jews. So yes, most Russian Jews are what they call Ashkenazim, which means European Jews. There was another kind of Jews called Sephardim, who are the Muslim Empire Jews. In the time of the Crusades, the Jews didn't divide, but the world did. The Jews who lived under the Christian world became known as Ashkenazim, which is the Hebrew word for the Holy Roman Empire, Ashkenaz. And the Jews who lived in the Muslim world, they became known as Sephardim, which from the Hebrew word for Spain, Sepharad. So that at the time of the Crusades, there was the Muslims and the Christians were not talking to each other. So that the Jews were divided, whether they liked it or not, for several hundred years, and there was a lot of inbreeding among the Jews. Interesting sidelight. People have suggested that Christopher Columbus might have been Jewish. That's not true. He was not. I've read Chris's book. He wrote his diaries, and Chris was a nice Christian boy, good Catholic boy, nice Italian boy, but he made his living off the Spaniards because on August 2nd, 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella kicked 300,000 Sephardic Jews out of Spain and nationalized all their money. You see, it's good business to be discriminatory. Kicked them all out and took all their money. They couldn't take it with them. So Ferdinand and Isabella had a lot of money, which is why Chris went to Ferd and Izzy and said, hey, I want to go explore the new world. Why don't you finance 3 ships for me? And Ferd and Izzy said, we got enough money to finance anything, kid, sure. And why did Chris sail the day the Jews were kicked out, August 2nd, 1492? For the same reason that Christopher took as his interpreter on his ship Santa Maria, a Jew who had converted to Catholicism by the name of Louis de Torres. Now, why would Chris take a converted Jew as his interpreter? Where was Christopher Colombo going? He thought he was going to the East Indies, right? And what kind of people lived in the East Indies in 1500? A whole bunch of crazy Muslims. So what did Chris figure? He said, oh, here I am, 3 nice Catholic ships with the big cross on the sail. You've seen the pictures. Representing the Catholic king of Spain, who just destroyed the Muslim Spanish Empire. And I'm going to land in the East Indies and say hi. And before I get the next sentence out, they'll have slaughtered me and taken my ship, because the Muslims and the Christians were at war. But Chris was a smart boy. He took Louis de Torres as his interpreter, because Louis was going to be the first guy hopping off the ship. And Louis was going to run to the local synagogue, because the Jews were well taken care of by the Muslims, and say to them, my boy Chris is here for trade. Why don't you introduce me to the local sultan? And Louis was going to go to the synagogue to make an entree for business. So I picture that famous moment in history when on the island of Hispaniola, Louis de Torres was the first white boy off the ship. And he ran up to the Indians and said, take me to your local synagogue. Okay. Any other questions about the people of Israel? Because now we will talk about the land of Israel, number 2. Can we have number 2? That's just number 1, part 2.
Yeah, well,
Ah, here we go.
oh, sorry, get back.
Get back, get back, get back to where you once belonged. So, if you remember your Bible, Abraham came from Babylonia. And I think the first week I was with you, I said, you know that we Jews come out of Babylonia because rabbis do like to Babylon. So Abraham came from a place called Ur, which means the city. There were probably 3 different cities in Babylonia in Ur. We're not sure which one, but we think that the one was in northern Syria or southern Turkey. And he went south. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we know he went south into the land bridge between Babylonia and Egypt, known as Eretz Canaan. Eretz means land of Canaan. And that was what it was called, Canaan. And that's what you think of as Israel in the Middle East. Now, we lived there for a couple of 100 years as wild and crazy Bedouins running around. And at some point, we went down into Egypt because Egypt was the breadbasket of the world. The reason that Egypt and Mesopotamia did so well is because they were the lands of the rivers. Egypt had the Nile, the Mesopotamians had the Tigris and the Euphrates, and these rivers always overflow in the spring. They overflow and they flood everything and make it very, very fertile. The ground is wonderful and great for planting crops. And so Egypt and Mesopotamia by 1600 BCE became the 2 major empires of the world and stayed that way for a long time. We know from archaeology and from our own Bible that the The Canaan was actually under control of Egypt for a long time. And so when there was famine in Canaan, they went for bread, and they weren't going to go all the way schlep up to Mesopotamia. They went down to Egypt, which was the breadbasket of the world. And so the Jews lived as a family in Egypt. You know the story of Joseph and the 12 tribes. They come out of Egypt, and by the year 1250 BCE, we come out of Egypt and go back to Canaan. And we either conquer the place or totally assimilate the place. And of course, if you read the book of Judges, you'll see there are two stories. One story, the official version, we killed every Canaanite, wiped them out, abolished their paganism, and made a wonderful country for God, yea, us. And then there are 12 little stories how, no, we didn't. We moved in, totally intermarried with them, picked up every bad habit of paganism they had. And it's amazing that God and monotheism survived, because we Jews liked every bad thing the Canaanites did. And we became the Canaanites. So you pay us your money, it takes the choice. At any rate, by the year 1000, the Canaanites had ceased to be major political players, and everybody was united under the king of the 12 tribes. The first king's name was Saul. The second king was very powerful. His name was David. And David made Canaan into Eretz Yisrael. He founded the city of Jerusalem as its capital, and he made Israel into a Jewish state that you and I think of, and the one we know in the Bible. In the year 930, the grandsons of David, the grandson of David was an idiot. He was not politically shrewd. If you read in the Bible, when the tribal elders came to him and said, you know, your grandpa, King David, taxed the hell out of us. Your daddy, King Solomon, increased the taxes, did a lot of public building, looks really good, but we're all groaning under the taxes. So tell me now, Rehoboam, grandson of David, son of Solomon, what are you going to do with taxes? And the Bible tells us that Solomon's advisors told his kid Rehoboam, look, Rehoboam, the Senate needs to confirm you. So just lie through your teeth, kid. Tell them how you're going to be a Democrat. Tell them how you're going to cut taxes. Tell them how you're going to be a pushover. They'll vote you in. You're absolute king. You got nothing to worry about. The young Turks, Rehoboam's friends, said, this is a test. You let these tribal elders walk all over you now, they'll walk all over you forever. So the Bible tells us, Rehoboam called the tribal elders together, and in beautiful Hebrew, he says, my little finger is thicker than my daddy's thigh. Which, if you think about it, he means my little finger muscle is stronger than my daddy's thigh. I mean, you think he was a powerful king? You think grandpa was a powerful king? You ain't seen nothing yet, tribal leaders. Whereupon 10 of the 12 tribes picked up, went up north, and voted on another guy to be king. And so in the year 930 BCE, we have the wonderful situation where there are two independent Jewish monarchies in the land of Israel who hate each other and spend the next 200 years fighting. The reason that it didn't stay like that, because in 721, Assyria, which was part of the Mesopotamia world, came down. they decided they wanted to conquer Egypt. Nobody actually wants to conquer Israel. There's nothing there. It's very parched land. It's horrible grazing land. It's a middle of nowhere. So why is it so important? It's so important because we live there. Yeah, no, that's not true either. It's important because the only two places in the world that are useful are Mesopotamia and Egypt. They got all the bread, all the money, all the water, and they're powerful. So if you are one of them, where do you want to conquer? The other one. And the only way to get between them is to tromp all over Israel. That's why Israel's important, because it's in the middle between the two big empires. And everybody passed right through. And when you pass right through, you also conquer them. So 721, Assyria moves out of Mesopotamia to go take Egypt. And the first thing they do is wipe out the northern kingdom of the two monarchies. They attacked the southern kingdom, but interestingly enough, the Assyrian army, when they attacked Jerusalem, Jerusalem's in the middle of nowhere. It's off the beaten path, and it's in the hills, so that the Assyrian army besieged Jerusalem, but they didn't have good sanitary conditions in those days. Plague broke out in the Assyrian army. So the Assyrians went away and conquered Egypt, because that was the only thing they cared about, and left Jerusalem alone. Well, of course, if you read our Bible, why did the plague break out in the Assyrian army? Because God sent the plague on the Assyrians, because we prayed to God. And this created a wonderful illusion for us Jews, that if you pray to God, he'll send the plague and kill your enemies. Yeah, well, that didn't work out too well most of the time. It did for the Assyrians, and that was it. In 586 BCE, what's up there is incorrect. It says 486. It says in the year 586, the new Assyrians, called the other Babylonians, came and conquered Jerusalem and started a series of foreign empires running Israel. The Babylonian Empire morphs into the Persian Empire, same place, same empire, just different players. The Persian Empire is defeated by Alexander the Great, and Israel now falls to Alexander the Great. You might have known the Maccabee story of Hanukkah. Didn't last too long. For the Maccabee kingdom was there 100 years, and then the Romans conquered it. In 132, a Jew by the name of Shimon bar Kokhba tried to throw out the Romans. He was the Jewish Messiah. The Romans came back and killed everybody. And so around the year 135 CE, there was nobody living in Israel. There were essentially Jews in Babylonia and Jews in Egypt, but the Romans pretty much killed everybody in Jerusalem and sold everybody as slaves in Israel. By the year 300, Constantine had the city had been refounded by the Romans, and there was a small Jewish population, but Constantine took the city and made it a center of Christianity. So around 300, Jerusalem was much less of a Jewish city and much more now of a Christian city. In 600, 700, Mohammed took Jerusalem and did the same thing. It now became much less of a Christian Jewish city and became a Muslim city. And there were a series of Muslims running around for the next 600 years until 1200, when things got very organized after the Mongol invasions, and the Ottoman Empire took over the Middle East, the whole Middle East, and for 500 years, there was stability under the Ottomans, if you don't count the Crusades too much. And the Ottoman Empire ruled the Middle East. The Ottomans were extremely corrupt. They had no idea what they were doing. They were terrible administrators. They played off everybody against everybody else. Their empire was very weak. They made the mistake of getting involved in World War I, and the British snapped up the entire Middle East. The British in 1917, at the end of the war, tried to decide what to do with the Middle East. And their deal was, yes, I'm sorry. Their deal was, let's see who's there and let's divide it up. Essentially, world Jewry put some pressure on the British and said, hey, now's a good time to let the Jews come out of Europe and go back to Israel. The Arabs out of Saudi Arabia, under Lawrence of Arabia, made a deal with the British. We'll fight for it if you give us Damascus. And so, as we go towards the end of World War I in 1920, the deal that the British made and that Lawrence got Faisal to agree to was that the Arabs get Damascus as the head of their new Arab monarchy, and the Jews get Jerusalem as their homeland once again. And that the British began to renege on immediately, and it began to fall apart until in 1948, the British said, we don't want this anymore, and they dumped it on the UN. Can I have the next page? So, now we have the question. No, leave this for a minute. We'll go back to the map. Now the question is, so whose land is it anyway? Mine. It's mine. God gave it to me in the Bible. He says, Wisnia, I give you the land of Israel, you and your children. That's very nice. I don't live there. So what do you mean it's mine? It's my homeland. It's my ancestry. I don't own any land there. I actually own a piece of land in Yardley. I paid money for that. Now, I understand there are some Lenni Lenape Indians running around who don't like the fact that I bought a house in Yardley. They keep saying 300 years ago, this was our land. And you white boys came and took it. And Wisnia, you're just the latest schmagegi to pay money to some other white boy who took our land. We want it back. Guess what? You ain't getting it. I paid good money and I own it. Now, I'll admit, yeah, 300 years ago, they probably did steal it from you Indians. What do you want me to do about it? I live there now. I paid for it, and I'm not giving it back to you. You want a house? Go buy it. It's mine. I'm sorry we took it from you. I do believe my government should give you some reparations, do something nice for you. But how upset do you want me to get? I didn't do anything wrong. It's my house, and I'm not giving it back. In fact, all you people who are listening to me, you're all a bunch of people who stole Indian land. Don't feel too bad, because the Indians who were living there moved in and wiped out the original people who lived there. It's been a series of tribes conquering other tribes forever. I'm sorry that this happened 300 years ago to the Lenni Lenape, but it's my house. So, in 1948, the United Nations decided they were going to divide Palestine in half. Half to the Jews, half to the Arab Muslims. The Jews agreed. The Jewish leader was a fellow by the name of David Ben-Gurion. And David Ben-Gurion, he spoke Russian and Yiddish and Hebrew. He had a heavy Russian accent, but he said in English, half a state is better than none. We'll accept the partition of the UN. The UN divided Israel in half and gave half to Ben-Gurion and the other half to Amin el-Husseini, who was the leader of the Palestinian Arabs. Now go back to the front page. If you see, this map is a relatively good representation of what was to be the partition of Israel. The south is all desert, so it wasn't going to anybody. And the West Bank was where most of the Arabs lived, and the Gaza Strip was where most of the Arabs lived. That was to be a little bit bigger and to be the Arab state of Palestine, which was created by the United Nations November 29th, 1947. The stuff in the middle, that's yellow, that was to go to the Jews, and that was to be the state of Israel. And that was also created the same day, August 29th, 1947. The Jews said, okay. Amin el-Husseini and the Arabs said, no, we do not accept it. We will not take and allow the Jews to have any land. We want it all. And a war began. Unfortunately for Mr. Husseini, he invited his Arab neighbors of Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia to bring in their armies and conquer the Jews. They all tried. We Jews beat them. Not because we're so brilliant and such wonderful soldiers. But if you read the story of why these 5 Arab armies could not defeat the civilian population of Jewish Israel, it's hysterical. It's because the Jordanians and the Egyptians hated each other so much that each army was afraid to do too much damage to Israel, because then the other guys would get more land. So the Jordanians surrounded Jerusalem and then stopped their attack. The Egyptians, meanwhile, did not attack because they didn't want to help the Jordanians. Then the Egyptians moved up, went through Gaza, and conquered what was to be Arab Palestine in Gaza, and moved up to Tel Aviv, where most of the Jews lived. The Egyptian army, of course, started taking casualties as they went to Tel Aviv. And although the Egyptians had heavy artillery and lots of tanks, when you start moving into downtown Tel Aviv, their tanks would have been sitting ducks. So the Egyptian army stopped because the Israelis had taken everything out of Jerusalem to defend Tel Aviv. They had their central part of their population. They managed to stop the Egyptians, or the Egyptians stopped themselves, because the Egyptians were allowing the Jordanians to take Jerusalem, and that was the only prize they wanted. So they sat for 3 months and did nothing outside Tel Aviv. The Israelis took every soldier they had, every civilian who could carry a gun, took them and put them in Jerusalem, left Tel Aviv undefended, and the Egyptians just allowed this, and they stopped the Egyptian army taking Jerusalem. Then the Jordanians, who took the old city, stopped their attack. They realized they were not going to win, and the Egyptians were not helping them. And they got angry and annoyed, and they stopped and told the Israelis, okay, we'll make an armistice. The Egyptians then got annoyed and made a right-hand turn to go take Jerusalem in the back. The Jordanians said, we won't do anything, go attack Egypt, which the Israelis did. They surrounded the Egyptian army, and the entire Egyptian army surrendered. The Israelis had no idea what to do with 200,000 Egyptians. So they took their boots and said, okay, go home. And they did. And Yasser Arafat, who was one of, Abdul Nasser, who was one of the commanders of the army, was so humiliated he never forgot Israel. He never forgave them. That's how Israel stayed existing. But Palestine, which was to be the West Bank and the Gaza, the West Bank was conquered by Jordan and kept, and Gaza was kept by Egypt. So Mr. Husseini, who was to be the leader of Palestine, had talked himself out of a country. He ended up living on the French Riviera as a very wealthy man and left his people in poverty and squalor. And that's been pretty much the situation ever since. Now, in the year 2000, there was a moment, you can stay on the map. There was a moment where Clinton forced the Israelis and Yasser Arafat to sit down and talk. And Yasser and Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud met with Yasser's right-hand man, Saeb Erekat, and they worked out a peace plan where the Israelis would pull out and give the Palestinians what had been their state. And Yasser agreed, and he had his thing, and Ehud Barak finally agreed to it. And then Ehud Barak went back to the Knesset, and before he could go to the Knesset and present the peace plan, Yasser Arafat reneged. He said, no, we cannot make peace because half a state is not better than none, and I cannot allow Israel to exist. And so he refused the deal that would have created an Arab Palestine in 2000. So Amin al-Husseini refused the deal in 1948 that would have created a Palestine. Yasser Arafat refused the deal in 2000 that would have created a Palestine. And so there is no Palestine. And that's where it sits, folks. Very sad, very tragic. Okay, any questions?
I don't know why you raised my hand. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So where does Zionism fit into all this?
Zionism is Zion is the Hebrew word for the mountain Jerusalem sits on. Okay, so Zionism is a Jewish term for Jerusalemism. And it's the concept that we've had since the days of our kings, David, Solomon, all those guys, that Jerusalem is our capital of our people. So most of us don't live in Israel. Most of us live outside of Israel. But we've always felt this relationship to Israel and the land of Israel. And to this day, Jews think of Zionism. Zionism has become a term for the Jews should have a state. We are a people and we should have a state. Now the question is, well, what about the Palestinians? You know, it's not like in America where you can have a state with Jews, Christians, Muslims, and atheists. Because that's not how we see the world. It's not how Arabs see the world either. Muslims see the world just like Jews. You're a Muslim, that means that's your nation. Your people are Muslims. Jews, their people are Jews. Now, we've been able to morph into the idea that, okay, those Jews who need a country should go to Israel. The rest of us, we're Jews, but we're going to live here. But yet, we have a relationship with the Jews all over the world. They are my people. America is my country. Jews are my people. I guess because Israel is the Jewish land, that's my country too. it may be hard for non-Jewish people to understand this because they look at it and say, well, you're a Jew. You're an American Jew. Yeah, I am. But yet on the, and I love my American brothers and sisters. I mean, I willingly pay taxes to help support you people. But on the other hand, the people in Israel, the Jews, are my people too. I got two peoples, America and Jews. The Muslims who live in the Middle East are different people. It's like Americans and Canadians. Frankly, I can't tell the difference, but I talked to those people up there north. They keep telling me they're a separate country. They got their own identity. They don't want to be part of my country. I say, okay, real good. Then you can't watch my TV anymore. And they say, too bad, we already got your TV. I said, yeah, but you're not getting my healthcare system. Well, they don't want my healthcare system. But it's not because I hate Canadians. It's because they're a separate country. The Muslims in the Middle East are not Israelis. They're a separate country. Israelis are Jews. Now, can you be a Christian and an Israeli? Yes, but it's difficult. The Israelis have actually figured, they bent over backwards to be nice to the Christians and the Muslims because they're not really Israelis. What happens is the Israelis collect taxes and give all their money to the people. They give back the money, but Israel uses the old system that the Turks set up of religious organizations, the Millet system. So in other words, all the Christians in Israel have to pay taxes because they're living in Israel, but the Israeli government then gives them a percentage of their money, and the Christian churches get to do whatever they want with that tax money because they're not Jews and the Israelis don't care. The Jews, all their tax money is divided up among the Jews, and the only people who get that money are the Israeli Orthodox rabbis. So actually, there's more discrimination against Jews in Israel than there is against Christians and Muslims. It's a crazy system, and it needs to be worked out. There needs to be first of all, the Arab world is insane. Look at what's going on in Jordan. There's nothing to do with Israel. And they are having revolutions and shooting each other. I mean, it's just terrible. There needs to be peace in the Middle East. There needs to be democracy in the Middle East. Israelis and Arabs need to have independent states, and they can live next to each other in peace. At the moment, that's not happening. And it's terrible. Zionism says the Jews have a right to live in Israel. Whatever the borders are, I'm willing to talk. Ehud Barak was willing to talk in the year 2000. If you know any Arabs who say, well, we want to negotiate, here I am, Eric Wisnia, one of 10,000 rabbis in the entire world. I am part of the international Jewish conspiracy. You tell him to call me and we'll draw maps together. And we'll talk about where Arabs live and where Jews live. But that's not happening. Very sad. Very sad.
So is it that the Palestinians are still fighting for the whole and not a shared? Is that what their philosophy still is today?
Yeah, that's the sad thing. That first of all, they have no leader today. That instead of Yasser Arafat, they have nobody. So nothing is happening. In Gaza, Hamas now rules. Hamas is a Sunni Arab bunch of crazies who are it's a dictatorship of several sheikhs, and they run Gaza as a as a mafia organization. They run this, they run the entire place. They don't build schools. They don't build infrastructure. There is a very little water. Do you know that all the water and electricity from Gaza comes from Israel? And the Israelis give it to Gaza? They give it to Gaza free. Hamas then charges the citizens of Gaza for the electricity and the water that the Israelis give them for free. There are very few hospitals in Gaza, so most Gazans who need a hospital go to Jerusalem, to the big Jewish hospital there, where they're treated for free. The problem is, unfortunately, every once in a while, some crazy walks in with a bomb. And so it's not so easy to get out of Gaza to go to an Israeli hospital anymore because too many people were blown up. It's a terrible situation. The one man who was supposedly in charge, Mohammed Abbas, who was Arafat's successor, they were supposed to have elections 10 years ago, and they haven't had elections. And he has given up the Gaza and doesn't rule the West Bank either. He just gets there's no government. There is nobody who speaks for the Arabs. That's a tragedy.
Yeah. One other question. When my one daughter used to live in Brooklyn, and that's where I had never really realized how the Jewish population really basically owns Brooklyn. And what faction is that? Is that the Russian faction that you were talking about, or who? What faction are they?
Okay. In between 1880 and 1914, 2.5 million Russian Jews picked up and came to New York. That's the Fiddler on the Roof people. Okay, that's what Fiddler on the Roof is about. At the last scene, they're leaving. They're going to New York. They all went to New York. Half the Jewish population left the Russian Empire and got out. They came and they wanted to assimilate. They became conservative and Reform Jews. What happened after the collapse of communism in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, several 100,000 Jews came out of Russia and Eastern Europe. Many of these were the Hasidic Jews, whereas the Hasidic Jews were a very small part of the Russian Jews. They were now all coming to America and became a large part. They're still a minority, tiny minority, but they're very visible. And the Hasidic Jews are the ultra-Orthodox. They do not want to assimilate. They want to live in their own little world. And the Orthodox, conservative, and Reform pretty much look upon them as a very right-wing extreme fringe.
Okay.
But they're a very small minority. It's just that they're very visible.
Mm-hmm.
Very visible, because they dress like, Poland 100 years ago.
That's what made me confused, is when you said that they were, what do you call them, conservative. And
I know nothing.
That's why I was like, they went to New York, but the ones I see in New York are not that. So that's where I got confused by your description.
I'm talking about the Jews who came here before World War I. Those Jews are all the Jewish people from New York that you think of, that you know in America today, because they are the descendants of those Fiddler on the Roof Jews who picked up and came to America. Yes, someone else had their hand up? Yes, sir.
You're muted.
You're muted. Who's that?
Bernie.
Bernie, you're muted. I can't hear you.
I'll do that again.
Now I hear you.
I had a long discussion with a former business partner of mine who was an Israeli and an American. And we were talking about the proportional response to the Palestinian aggression. And in some cases, it seems to be more than proportional. And my friend Itzhak was a very mild-mannered person, but he thought it was justified. But from our viewpoint, kind of bulldozing houses and strafing things, you know, and obviously we're going to see the worst of it. But how, I think my question is, how do you protect Israel?
Well, it is a very difficult situation when terrorists do terror. You know, the question in American law, you don't punish the family for the sins of one person. Of course, during the Civil War, you Yankees had no problem just destroying the South and burning all the farms and everything else because you said, well, they're all bad. All the women and children obviously voted for secession, so they deserved what they got. You know, governments do bad things. I did not support Bibi Netanyahu. I don't like him. I think he overreacted very much. I think he was not a good prime minister. And I agree with you, there was an overreaction. But I also, you know, I don't know, hopefully Mr. Bennett, the new prime minister, will be much more even-handed and not heavy-handed as Netanyahu was. What can I tell you? It's very hard when a terrorist kills himself and blows himself up and kills innocent civilians. How do you stop that? Well, one view was if a Palestinian terrorist blows himself up and kills a bus full of people, we're going to take his family and turn them out of their house and blow up his house. I don't agree with that. I don't like that. The Israelis don't do that anymore. It was, but you know, what can I say? I had a president recently who felt that the only people who are allowed to protest are his people. When people of color take to the streets, whether they do an insurrection or not, they're bad, they're terrorists, you know, they should be shot. His people should be pardoned. But, what can I tell you? Governments react strangely. But I agree, you know, the only people who should ever be punished are people who commit crimes. People who do not commit crimes are innocent civilians and should not be punished. And they deserve compassion. So in the past, there have been times when the Israeli government was heavy-handed. And I think you'll see a new prime minister with a new position, which I personally favor.
Thank you.
Any other questions about anything in the whole wide world? Because I know all the answers.
Can you speak just a little bit about Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah?
Jewish mysticism, yes. Jews have lived in countries all over the world, and particularly when mysticism became big in the Arab world. When Europe went into the Dark Ages, the Islamic world flourished, and the Jews lived under the Muslims relatively well. So that mysticism around 11, 12, 1300 of the Common Era became very big in Muslim Spain, and the Jews went into it. In fact, the Kabbalah, one of the major Jewish books of mysticism, was written at that point. I am not a mystic. It's very spiritual, very ethereal, very otherworldly, and I am a rationalist. So I've always looked at mysticism askance, and I smile, and like I say with many philosophies, if that's what you believe, that's lovely, but I don't. And, you know, I'm not a mystic. Jewish mysticism still exists. There are a lot of people who love it. And but then again, there's a lot of crazy things out there that Jewish people are into that I'm not into. So I don't mean to deprecate it too much, but it's interesting to study and learn about. I don't think there's anything to it because I'm a rationalist, and I think anything that takes you away from rationalism and takes you too much into your own feelings and your own, you know, imagination is a little dangerous. That's why I'm not a mystic. But we picked it up from the Muslims and the Christians. I mean, we're infected with the same insanity. Yes, Larry? Are you waving or you have a question?
Well, I was waving and I had a question. So I think you kind of, I think, suggested that Christians and Muslims in Israel are not Israelis. And I'm not sure, is that the case? I mean, do they have Israeli passports?
Yes, they're Israeli citizens, but in a sense, you see, Israel tries to have it both ways. Israel tries to say, well, we're a totally secular state, like you Westerners like to talk about a secular state. Yeah, well, that doesn't work because it's just not true.
Right. So actually, I have a couple of. I'll if I don't mind, I have a couple of questions that all sort of relate to that. So then, would you say that Israel is a democracy? And then the related question is, then is Israel a Jewish state? And if so, how can it be both a democracy and, you know, so-called Jewish state? And democracy, yes, the whim of whatever the people say it is, basically.
Yeah. See, that's the problem. It is a democracy, but it's a Jewish democracy.
But what does that mean? Yes.
That's a good question. I suppose the best way to try and get you to understand, not you personally, I know you do understand.
Actually, it's yours.
The best way for people to understand it is my synagogue was a democracy. It was owned by every member, and they voted on everything, on how to spend their money and on what their rabbi did. And, you know, now could my synagogue have voted to have a priest on the staff? Well, not really, because it wouldn't have happened. Because they're all a bunch of Jews. Now, some of them were not Jews. They were Christians married to Jews. And when they would say, well, maybe we should put up some Christmas decorations, I said, nah, we're Jews. Yeah, but I'm not a Jew. I said, I understand that. But if you're part of this group, you're a Jew. What makes us Americans is we belong to a secular society. What makes us Israelis is we belong to a Jewish people. So the reality is that the Christians and Muslims who live in Israel have it better than anywhere else, including the Jews who live in Israel. Because the Jews who live in Israel have to do it the way the Israeli government says. The Christians can do it any way they want, and the Israelis will protect them, pay them, and leave them alone. So it's very funny how there's religious discrimination in Israel against Jews who don't want to be Orthodox, whereas there's total religious freedom, in fact, government support for every crazy religious Christian and Muslim sect and Zoroastrian and anything else that wants to be there. So there's discrimination in Israel against Jews, but for everybody else. So you ask, how can it be a democracy? Because we're not defining nationhood as a geographic boundary. We're defining nationhood as the Jewish people. So therefore, I am a member of the Jewish people. I am an Israeli. Now, fortunately, they don't make me pay taxes.
And you don't get to vote.
But tomorrow, I could walk into Israel and say, I'm home. They have to accept me as a citizen because I'm already a citizen. It's a very strange, different point of view. In America, it is a secular society where religion and national ethnicity doesn't matter. Israel cannot be an absolute democracy because, well, what if more Muslims move in and decide to vote to be a Muslim society?
Exactly. So,
And that won't happen because Israel is a Jewish society. But the Israelis are smart enough to know they have to eventually give the Palestinians their own state because they can't be members of the Jewish state.
So I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Janet.
So then the people that are not Jewish in Israel cannot vote? Is that-
Oh, no, they can vote. Yes.
So they
Not
can
only
be
can
citizens.
they have better rights.
They can be citizens and they can vote. So
Right.
what is to stop them from overthrowing the Jewish state?
Because there's not a lot of them. And it won't be a problem until there's a lot of them. You know, it's like what happens if 50 million Canadians come over the border and start taking over our country? Well, what are they going to do? They're going to tell us we all have to say A and use your serviette and your cutlery. You know, we wouldn't even notice. We don't even notice the Canadians walking among us, subversives that they are. But it's because we're a secular society. Israel is not a secular society. They try and pretend they are, except they have Rosh Hashanah. They have Shabbat. Now, interestingly enough, you might say, well, I'm Christian. I don't want to celebrate Shabbat. And the Israeli government will say, oh, you don't have to. See, because you're a Christian, you can do whatever you want. You want to do Sunday, do Sunday. You want to do Seventh-day Adventist, do that. You want to do nothing, do nothing. You're a Jew, no, you got to do Shabbat. Because it's a Jewish state. It is strange. And it's very hard for us to understand because we don't view the world that way. And the question comes up with a lot of my children who say to me, well, so am I an American or am I a Jew? And I say, you're a Jew who lives in America. Yes, Bernie.
What proportion of the Jewish population in Israel go to synagogue or school or whatever it is?
I'm having trouble hearing.
What proportion of Jews are practicing Jews?
Well, that's a very difficult question because practicing Jew doesn't mean the same thing in Israel that it means in America. You see, do I celebrate New Year's Eve? Do I worship New Year's Eve? No, I have a day off New Year's Eve, whether I like it or not. Everybody knows it's New Year's Eve. You got to turn on your TV. The world stops in America on New Year's Eve. Same thing on Christmas. I don't celebrate those silly holidays, but yet I live in America, so I'm off from work on Christmas. I know it's Christmas. In Israel, you talk Hebrew. That's the Jew language. You may not go to shul on Saturday, but you sure know Friday night. Everything's closing down and it's Shabbat. You may not go to services. You may go to a discotheque, but you still know it's Shabbat You may still, most Israelis do light candles and make a kiddush, or they do some recognition of Shabbat because it's a Jewish country. They all know when Sukkot is. They all know the Jewish holiday because those are the national holidays. They're not religious, they're national, just like Christmas and New Year's and Easter. Israel's are they religious? No, but they're Jewish. And Israel's going to have problems. They're already having problems.
Yes, I know.
The Israelis are having major problems when they come to America. I see lots of Israelis who now come to America, and what happens to speaking Hebrew? They don't do that anymore. Their children don't speak Hebrew anymore. They assimilate into America within one generation, and then they ask the question, so what makes me Jewish? And the Israelis can't answer it because for them, they have mixed up nationality and religion and ethnicity, and they haven't dealt with it. American Jews, by and large, embrace it. We live in a secular American society, and we know we're Jews, whatever that means to us, whatever of the commandments we observe, whatever of the holidays we observe, but we deal with it. Israeli Jews don't, and they're going to have a big problem. Already, it is estimated there are 500,000 Israelis, that's 1/8 of the entire population of the country, who are living in America and are assimilating into American society, non-Jewish society mostly, rapidly. Not even 2 generations, 1. What's going to happen to them in the next generation? Are they going to lose all Jewish identity and just become nondescript Americans whose grandparents came from Israel, like my grandparents came from Warsaw? It's a big issue. And Jews are not like Christians in the sense that Christianity is a faith. If you tell me you don't believe in Jesus, I will take you to any minister or any minister of the gospel or priest of the church who will say to you, you're not Christian. Don't tell me that. You can't tell me you like Christian food. You can't tell me you're an ethnic Christian. You're not a Christian. And they'll tell you this. Well, you can be a Jew and not believe in God. Speak Hebrew, observe Shabbat, understand what I mean by the year 5782, and you're a Jew. Unless you accept Jesus, then. So hopefully I have given you some insight into the craziness that motivates the Jewish world. The important thing is that we are tolerant, hopefully, we are accepting, hopefully, and we treat all people as God tells us in the Torah. They are divine creatures. All God's creation is important and should be treated with deference and love. Amen. Thank you, folks.